Welcome to Marketing Monday. Today I want to talk about desire paths and what desire paths can teach us about building a better practice. Now, this is part one in a two-part series. Hope you got your cup of ambition. Here we go. So there is a concept in architecture and urban planning called a desire path. And this is the trail that people or animals create when they totally ignore the sidewalk and they walk where they actually want to go or where they need to go. You've seen them before, across lawns, around a building, through a park. Someone designed what they thought was sort of the quote unquote official route, but our human behavior has other ideas. And after enough people make the same choice, then a new path appears. And I found this image on weburbanist.com. So you know exactly what I'm talking about. And I think that when a lot of people look at how mediators and arbitrators build their practices, a correlation can be drawn between desire paths and the practice that we've got. And a lot of neutrals build the practice that they think that they should have. You or we create a website that sounds impressive, a bio that makes us sound more credible, a niche that we assume we're supposed to emphasize, the messaging that we personally like the best, the services that we most want to offer. And then, of course, we build that and we have to wait for the market to cooperate. But markets rarely cooperate with theory. They respond to clarity, to relevance, to trust, to fit. And so if your market keeps moving in a different direction than the one that you've designed, that's not something that you want to ignore. That's information. It's important information because that's your desire path. And I think one of the smartest things that you can do in practice development is stop asking only, what kind of practice do I want to build? But also ask, what is my market trying to hire me for? Because that's a totally different question. And it leads to better answers, I think, because your market is constantly leaving clues. The problem is, for most of us, that we're too busy trying to, quote unquote, present ourselves. And we don't stop and study what's already happening around us. So if you want to find your desire paths, you have to become a little bit more observant, maybe, and somewhat less attached to what you had designed as your original blueprint for your practice. And a really practical place to start with this is your inquiries. So go back and look at the last 10, 15, 20 people who reached out to you. Not just the matters that you got, but also the matters that you were considered for. And then ask yourself, what kinds of disputes were they bringing? Who reached out first? At what stage was the matter in? What seemed to make them contact you in particular? And then maybe most importantly, what problem were they actually trying to solve? Because people are often not hiring a neutral just for the process of mediation or arbitration, but they're hiring for the features of those processes: speed, control, credibility, patience, industry understanding, your particular settlement instinct, your calm presence in a case that has become really expansive or emotional or exhausting. And that kind of distinction really matters. So if somebody reaches out because they need a neutral who can handle emotionally charged business partners, then that tells you something different than someone who wants a retired judge for a complex commercial case. And the label of the case matters, but the underlying reason that they choose you matters more. And that's one of the clearest design paths you'll ever get. Another place to look for your design path is in your referrals. Referrals are incredibly revealing because they show you how other people already position you when you're not in the room. So when somebody says, oh, you should call her for this kind of case, or she's especially good at, right? Or she's especially good when, or she really understands X. Well, that kind of language is absolute gold, because whether you have formally claimed that niche or not, your market may already be assigning you one. And a lot of neutrals miss that. They keep trying to brand themselves as one thing while their referral sources are already telling them that they're known for something else. And that disconnect can really cost a lot of momentum. And then there's your content, of course. And I don't mean content in the shallow algorithm chasing sense. I mean, what ideas actually make your potential clients really lean in? Which posts start conversations? Which topics get you private messages? Which articles get shared? Which subjects seem to spark recognition, trust, or curiosity? Because if every time you write about difficult personalities in mediation, or settlement dynamics, or managing counsel expectations, and people respond, well, that's not random. That's your market telling you what they associate with value. And just as important, what posts get you no traction at all, because that matters too. Sometimes the desire path is not just where people are walking, but it's also very clearly where they're not walking. And you can find valuable clues in your consultations and everyday conversations. So pay attention to what people repeatedly ask, not once, but repeatedly. Do they keep asking whether or not you handle employment disputes? Do they keep asking you about pricing? Do they keep asking you if you'll mediate family business conflicts? Repeated questions are not just the background noise. These are really important questions that you need to pay attention to, because repeated questions are the demand for services. And if your market keeps knocking on the same door, it might be worth asking whether or not that door should be easier to find on your website or on your LinkedIn profile, in your bio, or in the way that you describe your work. So, given all of that, there then becomes the point that a lot of my clients want to avoid, understandably, and that's friction. It's just not in our nature, is it, as neutrals? So friction, I think, reveals one of the greatest sources of market truth. Where are people getting stuck with you? Where do you feel resistance in hiring or communication? Are your clients, I don't know, unclear, unimpressed? Or do they compliment your services and their experience with you, but maybe they don't book with you? Are you just always explaining what kind of cases you want? Do your potential clients truly understand your niche, or is there a misunderstanding, a disconnect there? Do they assume that they want one kind of work when you're trying to be hired for another? And the friction it's frustrating, but it is diagnosable. It tells you where your market is losing the trail, going off the path that you assumed was designed perfect. So when that happens, the answer is not more marketing. It's better alignment. You want clearer language, a sharper positioning, a more visible connection between what you do and what your ideal clients need. Because this is really where practice development gets to the really good stuff. A better practice is usually not built by inventing a path from scratch. It's built by paying close attention to where trust, demand, and momentum are already trying to form. And that doesn't mean that you let the market completely dictate your business. Of course, you still need to decide what kind of work you actually want to do and for whom. But the sweet spot is almost never found by asking only what you want. It's found at that intersection of the three things. What do you do exceptionally well? What you want more of, and what your market is already showing signs of wanting from you. So do something useful with this design path idea. And here's what I'll suggest. This week, spend just 30 minutes looking for the evidence of a a desire path rather. Look at your recent inquiries, look at your last few referrals, look at your recent consultations if you offer them, look at the content that people actually respond to, look at the questions people are asking, and then look at where people are confused or seemingly stuck, and then write down what you've noticed. And now, not what you hope is true, but what the actual responses are, what is actually repeating. And if you can learn to spot those patterns pretty early, then you can stop trying to drag people down the route that they never really wanted in the first place. And you can start building a practice that feels more natural, more aligned, and much easier for the right people to say yes to you. Your market is leaving footprints all the time on these desire paths. And part of your job is to notice where they lead. Because if you don't design the path, your market will redesign it for you, right? So once you see the truth your market is already creating, then the next question is pretty simple. How easy are you making it for people to follow that path? And next week, in part 2 of the Desire Path series, I'll be talking about what that looks like in real life and how to make working with you easier from the very beginning. That is it for me on Marketing Monday. Thanks so much for watching. Hope you have a great week. Be good, humans.